It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where birds chirp lazily and the air feels still. I was sitting on the porch, sipping my tea, letting the day pass gently like old men do. That's when I heard it, a scream. Not the kind children make when they play. This was different. Sharp, raw, frightening. I stood up so quickly my cup fell, shattering on the wooden floorboards. My heart pounded as I rushed inside. And there she was, my 8-year-old granddaughter, lying on the living room floor, her face twisted in pain, her tiny hands clenched into fists. Her leg, it wasn't right. It bent the wrong way. I knew instantly something was broken. Her cheeks had gone pale, and sweat beaded at her forehead. She was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling in panic. I knelt beside her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "What happened?" I asked, even though I already knew. My son and his wife were standing a few feet away. Arms crossed like this was an inconvenience. "She's exaggerating," my son muttered. "She just tripped." "Kids do that," his wife added casually, pulling out her phone. "No," I said firmly. "This is serious. We need to get her to the ER. Look at her leg." But they didn't move. My son looked annoyed. "She's fine, Dad. Don't make a big deal out of everything. She just needs to get up and walk it off." I turned to him, stunned. "She can't even move. She's in pain. Can't you see that?" His wife bent down and touched the girl's arm. "Come on, sweetie. Let's get you up." "No," she whimpered, shaking her head. "It hurts." But they didn't listen. They pulled her up, and the second her foot touched the ground, another scream pierced the air. This time it was worse. Bone deep, her knees buckled, and she collapsed again, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood there, helpless, as the people who were supposed to protect her ignored her cries. And in that moment, something inside me broke too. The house was still asleep when I opened my eyes. Dawn hadn't fully arrived, just a faint glow peeking through the curtains. But I had made up my mind in the silence of the night. I couldn't let another hour pass under this roof of neglect. My granddaughter needed help, not hollow reassurances and shrugged shoulders. I moved quietly through the hallway, careful not to creak the floorboards. Her room was dim, her tiny frame curled up in pain, blanket clutched tight against her chest. Her leg, swollen now, lay motionless. She stirred when she heard me enter, her eyes searching mine. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." She didn't speak, just nodded once, slowly. Trust, silent but complete. I wrapped her in the softest blanket I could find, lifted her into my arms, and held her like I used to when she was a baby. Only now, she was heavier, and the weight of what I was doing heavier still. Outside, the early morning chill kissed my face. I carried her all the way to the bus stop. She clung to me silently. We didn't say a word, but every second felt loud, with fear, guilt, and quiet courage. We boarded the first bus heading toward the hospital. It was a 40-minute ride, each bump of the road making her wince. I held her tighter, shielding her from every jolt I could. When we finally reached the ER, nurses rushed to us the moment they saw her face. Her leg had started to turn color, and her body trembled from the effort of holding back pain. "Fracture, possibly a break," one nurse said quickly. A doctor examined the X-ray just minutes later, his brow furrowed. "This leg is fractured. Badly. There's swelling near the growth plate. She shouldn't have been walking at all." I stayed quiet. Then came the question, who made her walk? My throat tightened. The truth burned in my chest. But looking down at her, frightened, exhausted, I couldn't drag her deeper into this mess. "No one knew," I said softly. "We thought it was a bruise." The doctor nodded, not entirely convinced. But he didn't press. They wheeled her away gently, promising to ease the pain. And as I sat alone in the cold waiting room, I realized I hadn't just carried her to the ER. I had carried her out of silence. A nurse walked toward me with a clipboard, her steps careful, almost apologetic. I stood up instinctively, my back aching from the hours in that hard plastic chair, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. "There are some forms you'll need to fill out," she said gently, handing them over. I took them with a nod, but my eyes froze on the bold print near the top corner. Possible neglect, parent guardian awareness pending. My heart sank. Behind the doors, my granddaughter was finally asleep, sedated, and being prepped for a cast. But out here, the world was already shifting. I wasn't sure if it was for the better or worse. The nurse continued. Due to the nature of her injury and the delay in seeking treatment, we're required to alert Child Protective Services. It's protocol, so. I understand, I whispered, though I barely did. I sank back into the chair, paperwork in my lap, and stared at the single item in my hand, her shoe. Just one. The other had been lost somewhere between the living room and the bus stop. It was pink, with a tiny strap and worn edges. She loved them. She called them her magic shoes because she believed she could run faster when she wore them. And now here I was, holding that tiny shoe like it was evidence of a crime I hadn't meant to be part of. Maybe I was guilty too, of waiting too long, of staying silent for too many days, of believing they would do better eventually. My fingers curled around the shoe, and I stared ahead, not really seeing the white walls, or the posters on child nutrition, or the vending machine humming in the corner. I saw my granddaughter's future, split in two like the fracture in her bone. One path, they investigate, and she's returned to the same house, the same hands that made her walk on a broken leg. The other, she comes home with me, and I fight to protect her, even if it means turning against my own blood. The decision wouldn't be mine alone, but the responsibility, that weight was already sitting squarely on my shoulders. This wasn't just a hospital visit anymore. It was the beginning of something far greater, a turning point neither of us had asked for, and perhaps the moment that would define the rest of our lives. The door creaked as I stepped back into the house. It was early afternoon now, sun pouring through the windows like nothing had changed. But everything had. I closed the door behind me quietly, hoping, foolishly, that there might still be room for conversation. My son was already standing in the hallway, arms crossed, jaw clenched. The moment our eyes met, it was as if the air turned sharp. "You went behind our backs," he said flatly. "You made us look like monsters." "I took her to the hospital," I replied calmly, "because she needed help." His voice rose. "You had no right. She's our daughter, Dad. You made a scene. Social services came to our door this morning." I didn't respond. There was no defense to offer for doing what should have been done days ago. Then she appeared, my daughter-in-law, holding my duffel bag with both hands. She shoved it hard against my chest. "You want to act like a hero? Then go live like one." Her eyes were filled with something colder than anger. Contempt. I looked down at the bag. It was the same one I used when I first moved in to help them with a baby, back when they promised they needed support, back when I believed I still had a place here. Now I was being tossed out. No warning, no conversation. Just done. "I protected her," I said softly. They didn't answer. I walked to the front door and paused. Part of me expected one of them to call out, to take it back, to say something, anything, that resembled love. But silence filled the hallway like fog. Heavy, unmoving. So I stepped out, onto the porch, down the steps, bag in hand. The house behind me remained still, doors closed, curtains drawn. And as I walked away, I realized it was never a home. Not anymore. Just a house full of silence. And people who stopped listening long ago. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Not that night. Not emotionally. So I went to the only place where I thought someone might actually listen. Not out of duty, but because they knew me. Harold Green was an old friend from church. We'd shared many quiet Sundays over coffee, Bible study, and long silences that spoke more than words. He'd been a lawyer most of his life, sharp, methodical, and quietly ruthless in the courtroom. Now retired, he spent most of his days tending his rose garden and mentoring troubled youth. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, duffel bag slung over my shoulder, face worn down by days of helplessness, he didn't say a word. He just stepped aside and let me in. We sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by old books and the faint scent of peppermint tea. I pulled out the folder I'd gathered at the hospital, printed medical notes, the ER report, the form marked possible neglect, and the shoe. Her little pink shoe. I also showed him the texts, cold responses from my son when I'd pleaded to take her in. Even a photo I had taken of her leg that morning, swollen, bruised, unnatural. Harold looked through everything in silence. He didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. Just listened. Really listened. When he finally looked up, his face was unreadable. "This isn't about custody," he said quietly. "This is about justice." He leaned back and tapped his fingers on the folder. They made her walk on a broken leg. Then they kicked out the only person who tried to help her. A court's not going to look kindly on that, especially not with hospital documentation this thorough. I felt something tighten in my throat. I hadn't even known what I came here to ask for. Help, maybe. Or just someone to tell me I hadn't lost my mind. Harold nodded slowly, then stood up and disappeared into the next room. He came back with a slim binder and a legal pad. "We start with guardianship paperwork. Then we notify CPS with our own report, written under counsel. We make it official." I looked at him, overwhelmed. "You really think we can do this?" He met my eyes. "I think we have to." The knock came mid-morning. My son texted me hours later, his message cold and clipped. "Thanks for ruining our lives." But I already knew the visit had happened. The social worker had arrived with a file in hand, a file I had helped prepare. Inside were copies of the ER report, the x-rays, the doctor's notes, and photos showing the state of my granddaughter's leg the morning I carried her out of that house. When the door opened, they played their part perfectly. Calm smiles, polite nods. Just two responsible parents welcoming a caseworker for a routine misunderstanding. They offered tea. They gestured toward the couch. They explained how their daughter had tripped while playing, how she had seemed fine, how they tried to comfort her. "We thought it was just a sprain," my daughter-in-law said sweetly, with a nervous laugh. "Kids fall all the time, right?" The social worker listened without interrupting, then slowly slid the papers across the table. "Is this your daughter's medical report from the ER?" Their faces shifted. My son tried to recover, leaning forward. "Look, we didn't mean any harm. She didn't say how bad it was. She didn't tell us it hurt that much." The social worker asked one question. "Why did multiple witnesses say they heard her scream as she was forced to walk?" There was no answer, not a real one, just deflection, discomfort, silence. Meanwhile, across town, my granddaughter remained in temporary foster care, just for the time being. She was with a kind woman named Rachel who had sent me updates through Harold. The swelling in her leg was going down. She was eating better, sleeping more. She had asked if she could see me again soon. She asked about her shoe, Rachel wrote. She said it's lucky, said you still had it. I did. I kept it by my bed. The system was in motion now. Not perfect, not fast, but finally leaning toward truth. And for the first time in weeks, I believed something my son no longer could. Sometimes the past doesn't bury you. It buries those who tried to pretend nothing ever happened. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just from the marble floors or the humming air vents, but from the tension that lingered between the rows of seats, where eyes watched and judgments whispered before words were even spoken. I walked in slowly, each step deliberate. My back was straight, my hands steady. Not because I wasn't scared, I was. But fear had long since given way to purpose. My son sat at the table across the room, jaw tight, arms crossed. His glare met mine. It wasn't anger anymore. It was betrayal. The kind that only stings when someone you thought was loyal chooses truth instead. He hadn't looked me in the eye since the hospital visit. The proceedings began. The judge, a stern woman with tired eyes, asked for testimonies. First came the ER nurse. She described the injury in clinical but unmistakable terms. A displaced fracture, days old, worsened by pressure and walking. Next, the neighbor. She recalled hearing a child scream that didn't sound like play. It sounded like pain. She had nearly called the police but assumed the parents were handling it. Then the bus driver, a woman in her 40s with gentle eyes. She remembered me boarding with a bundled child. She never cried once, she said, her voice shaking. But the way she clung to him, I knew something wasn't right. The defense tried to downplay everything. Overreaction, miscommunication, lack of medical training. They even painted me as emotionally unstable, a lonely grandfather with a savior complex. I stayed silent, hands folded in my lap, until it was my turn. I stood. My knees ached, but I didn't let them see that. I walked to the front, took the oath, and looked directly at the judge. I didn't come here because I wanted a fight, I began. I came here because I couldn't sleep at night knowing my granddaughter was being ignored, in pain, and told to stay quiet. I paused. No one moved. I didn't want to raise my son to be cruel, I said softly, but I won't let cruelty raise my granddaughter. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. This isn't about revenge. It's not even about family anymore. It's about a little girl who deserves to grow up knowing someone chose her, who put her first, and I'm willing to be that person for as long as she'll let me. I stepped down, and in that silence, the kind that swallows a room whole, I knew something had shifted, not just in the courtroom, but in history. The judge's gavel tapped gently, not in anger, not with drama, but with finality. All parties will please rise. We stood. The courtroom felt suspended in breath. No whispers, no shifting seats, just stillness as the judge looked over the final notes in her file. Then she spoke. After reviewing all testimonies, medical reports, and witness statements, this court finds sufficient ground to assign temporary guardianship of the minor child to her grandfather, Mr. Elliot Hayes. My heart didn't leap. It didn't race. It simply steadied. The judge continued, her voice firm but not unkind. The parents are hereby ordered to complete parenting education classes, attend regular counseling sessions, and participate in monitored family visits. Reassessment will take place after 90 days. My son's head dropped. His wife clenched her jaw but said nothing. And then, movement. From the back corner of the room, where Rachel the foster guardian stood, came a small sound, the soft thump of rubber crutches against wood. My granddaughter stepped forward slowly, carefully, her legs still braced, her arms gripping the crutches. She looked at the judge, then at me, and then she let go of one crutch, just long enough to limp into a shaky run, straight into my arms. The courtroom remained frozen, eyes wide, breaths caught. But for me, in that moment, the world narrowed to the quiet warmth of her embrace, her tiny arms wrapped around my waist, her cheek pressed against my coat. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to, because somehow, she already knew. We were finally going home. The house was small, just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that smelled of old wood and new hope. The paint peeled in places, the heater rattled when it worked, and the garden out back had been untouched for years. But to us, it was perfect. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. The first few days were quiet. We didn't talk much. She followed me from room to room like a shadow, crutch tucked under her arm, eyes wide with that leftover fear she hadn't yet unlearned. I didn't ask her to smile. I didn't ask her to forget. I just stayed close. In the mornings, we worked in the garden. Her favorite part was digging shallow holes with a tiny blue trowel. "This one's for the yellow flowers," she'd say, carefully pressing the seeds into the earth with her thumb. I let her plant whatever she wanted. Marigolds, sunflowers, and a single patch of strawberries. In the afternoons, I read to her. Old books, gentle ones, stories where good things happened to good people, and no one was told to walk on a broken leg. At night, she asked for the light to stay on, just a little. So I found an old nightlight shaped like a star and plugged it in by her bed. It cast soft golden shapes on the wall. She never cried. Not once. Not when she stumbled. Not when her brace came off. Not even when the doctors said her leg would always need care. She held everything in, but I saw it. In her drawings, in the way she placed her shoes carefully by the door, in how she hugged me tighter after each bedtime story. Her healing didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, quiet ones, small victories. But piece by piece, I could feel it. She was beginning to believe that pain wasn't permanent. And maybe, neither was Faye. It came on a Tuesday, folded neatly inside a plain white envelope. with my name written on the front in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. Femme, slanted, a little rushed. No return address. Just the past, sealed and delivered. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the envelope resting in front of me, untouched. The kettle hissed in the background. My granddaughter was outside, watering the marigolds with a plastic cup. She hummed to herself now. That was new. I finally opened it. The letter was short. Just one page. My son had never been a man of many words. Not when they mattered. Dad. I didn't know what I became. But I see her smile now, and I know I didn't deserve it. I've been going to counseling. The court ordered it, but I kept going after the sessions ended. I don't want to ask for forgiveness. I just want to say thank you for doing what I couldn't. She looks happier. I hope you are too. Mark. I read it once. Then again, not to search for meaning. There was nothing hidden. It was just strange. Strange to hear his voice again without the defensiveness, the denial, the sharp edge. For a moment, I felt something move inside my chest. Not quite sadness, not yet forgiveness. Just something soft, something tired. I folded the letter carefully, then stood up. In my bedroom, there's an old wooden drawer I rarely open. Inside it, I've kept the hospital bracelets from her ER visit, the photo of her swollen leg, court papers, copies of the judge's decision, and that one small pink shoe, worn, faded, but never forgotten. I placed the letter alongside them, not to treasure it, but to remind myself, growth is possible, even if it's late, even if it comes in silence. I didn't respond. Not yet. Some bridges aren't burned. They're just waiting for the right time to be crossed. And until then, I'd keep building something better, right here, where the light always stayed on. A full year had passed since the courtroom, the hospital, the silence. Now, the gymnasium was buzzing with excitement. Folding chairs set in rows, nervous parents clutching phones, the smell of popcorn and floor wax lingering in the air. Colored lights danced across the makeshift stage as children peeked from behind cardboard trees, waiting for their cue. I sat quietly in the third row, a small bouquet of daisies resting in my lap. Her favorite. Not because they were the biggest or brightest, but because she said they looked like the sun. The program read, Spring Showcase, Grade 3, Dance Number, Reach for the Stars. I scanned the stage, and there she was. My granddaughter, hair tied in a neat bun, a sparkly blue dress that caught the light with every move, and that same determined expression she wore when she first planted strawberries behind the house. Her leg, once wrapped in pain and fear, moved freely now. No cast, no brace, just careful strength. The music began, soft piano notes blooming into a gentle melody. She stepped forward, counted under her breath, and twirled. Slowly, precisely, gracefully. It wasn't the biggest movement, but to me, it was everything. Each step spoke louder than any apology her parents could have written. Each spin was a rebellion against every time someone told her to walk it off. Each lift of her arms said, I healed, and not just my bones. The audience clapped along. The other kids danced around her, laughing. She smiled, wide and bright, not to perform, but because she was happy. Truly, freely, happy. And then it ended. They bowed. Parents stood, applauding. Phones flashed. She looked out at the crowd, scanning faces, and then locked eyes with me. That smile, the one I'd waited months to see without pain behind it, widened. She jumped off the stage and began walking down the aisle. Not limping, not wobbling, just walking. Light, proud, strong. She reached me and threw her arms around my neck. No crutches, no need, just love. I saw you the whole time, I whispered. I know, she said into my shoulder. You always do. I handed her the daisies. And in that moment, surrounded by noise, flashing lights, and dozens of other people, it felt like we were the only two in the world. She didn't need saving anymore. She just needed someone to believe she could dance again. And that night, she did. The evening was quiet, long after the applause had faded and the last of the folding chairs were stacked. My granddaughter was asleep in her room, Daisy's in a glass jar by her window, her shoes tucked neatly beside the bed. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of chamomile in front of me, pen in hand, and a blank page resting on top of a leather-bound notebook I'd been saving for years. Not for a story, not for a speech, but for her. This letter isn't for a judge. It's not for my son. It's not for the court or the records or the file drawer in my closet. It's for the little girl who once limped beside me with quiet eyes and a swollen leg. And for the young woman she's becoming, brave, bright, unshakably soft. To my dearest Hope, you may not remember everything. You were young, too young to carry what you did. But you carried it anyway. Pain, confusion, silence. You carried it in your bones, in your eyes, in the way you said nothing when you should have cried. And maybe I carried it too, because I was there, and I waited too long. But that morning, when I wrapped you in a blanket and walked you to the bus stop, you didn't ask questions. You just trusted me. And that trust, it saved us both. You see, when you stood on that stage, twirling, laughing, whole, I didn't just see a girl dancing. I saw a heart that healed. I saw the future. I saw the reward for every silent decision, every battle fought behind closed doors. You didn't just learn to walk again. You learned to rise from pain, from neglect, from the cold grip of being overlooked, and into the warmth of knowing you are chosen, protected, and unconditionally loved. There may come a time, years from now, when you question who you are, when the world seems too loud or your voice too small. In those moments, I hope you remember this. You were never weak. You were never broken. You were just waiting to be believed in. And if you ever wonder what I was to you, I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a savior. I was simply someone who saw your pain and refused to let it grow roots. So when people ask what I did with my final years, tell them this. I carried a little girl until she could learn to stand on her own. And then I stepped back so she could fly. With all my love, always. Grandpa, some children carry pain too early, and some grandfathers are simply here to carry it with them until it becomes strength.